Hi, this is Heidi Gaiman from HeidiGaiman.com with another video for He Calls Me Loved, our study of or our sprint through what God calls us in Isaiah. And through doing that, we learn about the characteristics of God Himself and get to know Him a little bit deeper. This week is week 5, and we're going to talk about clay and how God calls us clay. I think that'll be really clear through our passage that we're going to study today for this video in Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 1 through 6. I'm going to give you a little bit of the context of Jeremiah first, and our guiding question is, what is the value of molding and shaping in our lives? What value is there in that? Because sometimes it's a little uncomfortable. Sometimes it's a lot uncomfortable. And very rarely does molding and shaping happen without any discomfort. And so what is the value in that? We're going to settle ourselves in that. We're going to stick through Jeremiah 18, 1 through 6. And I want to give you a little context, a little background of Jeremiah, and then we'll have 2 points for today's study. Jeremiah is known as the Iron Prophet, and he was called to preach against the kings in Judah, the people of Judah, which is the southern nation of Israel after the split in the Old Testament. There's like, if you don't know about that, it's okay. You don't have to dig into that today. But if you would like to, get a study Bible, open it up and look a little bit at some background of Jeremiah, and I'll tell you about those different 2 kingdoms that Israel was split into. And so he's speaking to this southern kingdom, Judah, the last kind of remnant of a kingdom of the nation of Israel in the time of the Old Testament. But he is telling them stuff they don't want to hear. He's telling them how hard their hearts are, how they have turned from God. And so I think that we can appreciate Jeremiah being the voice for things that are hard, truth that is hard. And we can see how that can be true in our lives today, in our world today, that so often Christians are called to be a voice in and about things that are really hard, that people don't want to talk about or that people don't want to hear a truth perspective on, that they are really not interested in changing lifestyles or changing belief systems and things like that. And so we can appreciate how hard that is for Jeremiah, that wasn't an easy place to go into. And then, to make it even more interesting, God calls Jeremiah to do this so often in ways that are metaphoric. And so he has Jeremiah do these really weird things like sell a property and, make statements about it. And then God, really translate what he's saying in that metaphor. Or the funniest one is probably that he has him get new underwear. We won't go into that today, but that's a good one to think about because it's so obscure. And the last one is the one we're going to talk about today, is visiting a potter. And going to see the experience of making pottery on a wheel and what that is, what that looks like, and how that translates into what God is doing in our own lives. And so we're going to study that today. Again, our guiding question, what is the value of molding and shaping in our lives? Let's read the text, Jeremiah 18, 1 through 6. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord: arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. And the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to do. Then the word of the Lord came to me: O house of Israel, can I not do with you as the potter has done? Declares the Lord. Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. I think I said we had 2 points. That's not true. We always have 3 points in these videos. So our first point is, number 1, it's encouraging to know that everything can be remolded. Everything can be remolded. That includes you and me. That includes our past and our lives and our vantage point of those things. That includes what words just came out of our mouth. That includes our families. That includes our work environments. Anything can be remolded in the Lord Jesus Christ. I think so often we picture ourselves really hard and dry and cracked. Especially as we go through life and we begin to be a little bit older, and we have been shaped so much by those childhood experiences, by, if you're a young adult, even, you have that history that's built into you. And so often you think those things of that past are not really malleable anymore. It just kind of is what it is. But the reality is that there is a different place that it can be in our lives with Jesus. This passage reminds us that we are malleable, that our vantage points are malleable, that our framework is malleable, that Jesus comes in and can shape and mold everything in our lives. I want you to picture yourself in your life. And instead of picturing, it's so easy to get that. It's kind of like a New Testament idea too, because we have we are, jars of clay, we are cracked vessels, and that's not untrue. But at the same time, I think we get so stuck in that picture that we picture ourselves as this really, a vase, if you will, or a mug, and it's hard. Like if we dropped it, it would break and shatter into a million pieces. Instead, this passage gives us another vantage point of ourselves. Instead of just picturing that hard vessel that's already formed and it's really not going to change much, instead, we get this version of us that God sees that is a lump of Play-Doh, that is a lump of clay, that is, soft and kind of wet and kind of able to be formed, if you will. So I want you to picture yourself or your life as flexible. You kind of think of maybe like the snake of Play-Doh in your hands. Or, if you are doing the study on your own, go out, rustle through some toys you might have in your house, or find some art supplies, whatever. But consider just actually feeling the clay to get this vantage point, and imagine that as your life and what God is doing to it. You can think of some other ways to imagine that too. Like I think about folding a sheet, not a fitted sheet because those are terrible, but like a flat sheet. When you take it out of your laundry basket and you try to fold it, you kind of shake it out or whatever. That sheet that can just be easily like melded into this nice square or whatever, and then taken back apart and used to warm someone and things like that. Like that's another way we can picture, I think, this moldable idea of our lives. And then the last one that comes to mind for me is the preschool gym class parachute, that they hold on to and you kind of yank it up and down. But there's a freeness to it, right? Everyone loves that activity because there's just so much like movement, and it just feels really freeing to be able to shake that little parachute around, and maybe the balls are bouncing around it. That's the kind of malleability that God is telling us that He has in our lives. His hands are what molds that. It's not like we are so malleable that we're like flying everywhere and we're just, feeling yanked around and things like that. Instead, God's hands are the ones that are molding and shaping and all of that good stuff. And that's a powerful thing. So there's both the flexibility, and then there's some like boundaries of His strength that hold us up. So what kind of discomfort is in this malleable life, versus seeing the inflexible version? It sounds really good for a minute, like all of this flexibility, but what discomfort is there in that for us? I think we need to be honest that flexibility is awesome, but there are places and spaces. There's a reason we don't look at ourselves that way, is because there is some discomfort there too. I think one thing that's really encouraging is in Jeremiah, the first 3 verses, that 18 verses 1 through 3, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, arise and go to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. And verse 3 says, so I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working at his wheel. That's what we can say about God. There he was. He's sitting at the wheel. He's actually there molding and shaping us. And that's so encouraging. There he was. That is true for your life today too. And God is faithful. He never fails us. Where can you see God working in your day today? Where can you see him at the wheel of your life? Or help each other out, especially if you're in a group. Help your friends out. Help them to see where he is at the wheel. Sometimes we need other people to help reveal that for us. What are some things you see him molding and working directly or indirectly in your life? Sometimes it's really evident, and sometimes God takes like the back door way. And so where do you see him molding and working in your life? Point number 2, that wheel of life, though. I think sometimes it's good to recognize that it does kind of feel like the potter's wheel around and around and around. And while there's some stability in that, and knowing that, we are not going to fall off the wheel, there is, I think, always deep in our hearts, and sometimes way at the surface, that fear that things could go awry at any point, and then there's just pottery going everywhere, right? I really love Ferris wheels. It's one of my favorite wheels in the whole wide world. I think they're super fun. I don't have a fear of heights. I think the bigger the better. Last year for my birthday, my friend knows me so well that we were driving to a concert, and she pulls over. She's like, "I have a surprise." And she introduced me to the fact that Shields, the sporting goods store, which this is not an advertisement for Shields, but they have a Ferris wheel in all their stores. And so we got off, and they give you a free Ferris wheel ride for your birthday. And so that was super fun. And so that when I think of wheel, that's what comes to my mind, is that moment when she shared this joy with me, and that she knew I would enjoy this surprise of a Ferris wheel. However, I also think, when I think of Ferris wheels, then pretty quickly to this incident that happened, and thank goodness we were not involved. And it was simply like the day before we came to my mother-in-law's house and my father-in-law's house to visit them. They have this big town festival, and there's a Ferris wheel, and we've ridden it before, and it's like one of those little carnival Ferris wheels. But someone in the festival, like, you can drive close to it, but then there's barriers and stuff. Someone was driving recklessly and like broke through the barriers and actually like moved the Ferris wheel like up half a street. And so that sounded terrifying to me. And I think that's how the wheel of life feels a little bit to us. Like at any moment, it feels kind of like, oh, this is so fun. It's birthday Ferris wheel time. And then the other end of the spectrum is like, someone's driving into this wheel, and this is not good. This is not safe in any way, shape, or form. And then we have all of our days in between those two. But recognizing both those parts of the wheel is kind of important. Again, we focus on the potter's hands around us, that he is holding us. It's not the wheel that holds us up. It's not that... forgive me for taking this metaphor maybe too far, but, it's not the wheel's job. It's not life's job to make us feel really great about ourselves, to help us remember that we're malleable, to help us know that we're safe and secure and cared for and being worked with. It is the potter's hands that infect our lives, that hold us and care for us and mold us on the wheel that we call life. And so verse 4 is a verse that really helps us remember this. Let's go back to that. And the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hands, and he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to do. So he always reworks it. There's that promise there that he works that. However, it seemed good to the potter. The potter gets to decide, and he does do that in our lives too. Life tosses us around the wheel sometimes, and we can blame the potter when the wheel is the one like that probably is not doing great. We see spoiled clay in the moment. I read somewhere. He sees the masterpiece in the making. He can see that it's worth like bringing it back in, messing around with it, and then crafting it into something so much better. God calls it good that he made us. He calls it good that this clay is his. He also calls it good to rework and to mold us with his grace and his mercy. So there's that question. What is the value of being reworked? What value do you see in being remolded in life versus if we turned out great just the first time, that's the way it was. What value is there in like starting again and bringing that clay back to, a nice little ball that you put on the wheel again and rework it? What value is there in that? And the final point is, in reality, We are always undergoing the process of kneading. I think sometimes, and by kneading I mean Kneading. Sometimes we see that as a season, like, oh, God's really working in my life right now. I really I can see it and I feel it and I don't love it or I really love it or whatever. We think of that as a season. And while the seasons do look different, and that's an important aspect, and we talk about that in Casting Stones, there is the reality that we are constantly being needed by God. He is always working and molding and shaping us. There is not a time when his hands are absent from that pottery wheel of our lives. Verses 5 and 6 helps us remember this. Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel, that's us, we're God's people. Can I not do with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord. Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. So are you. Molding and kneading is a constant process of discipline with love. It feels like discipline a lot of the time. Right? It feels so often like stretching and working and, pushing us down and pulling and doing some stuff to our lives that we may or may not love. But it also absolutely feels like love. It feels so much safe. It feels so much safer, sorry to say, in the hands of the potter than if we were outside of that. If we didn't know Jesus and we weren't able to have that kind of relationship with God, then I think that absence of being held in the hands of the potter and knowing that someone is working and holding us, wow, what a powerful thing. Consider it like when people have to go to physical therapy. They've maybe had a hip replacement or any kind of joint replacement, or they were in an accident, or they had a sports injury or whatever. You go into PT, you have to tell your muscles again what to do. You have to rework them. And those physical therapists, man, they do things that are really uncomfortable, right? And move you around. But then there's also things that are really pleasant, like massaging and taking care of our muscles and resting and things like that. Both those things are necessary. Taking care of our body, letting it recuperate, that kind of place of love and affection and care, and then also the hard work to regain strength for our muscles to do what they need to do, to perform at our maximum capacity. And that is also true of the kneading that God brings into our lives. The kneading of a massage, that it's wonderful and it feels so good, but it also hurts a little bit. That is the way that we experience, I think, this malleability in our lives that God brings to it. So how is God currently kneading you? Kneading you as in dough or massaging? What parts of your life feel like it's being molded, but you aren't sure what the result or the final outcome will look like? What parts of your life right now feel like, okay, there's some molding going on here, as you can sit back and think about that? Maybe in the life of your family, maybe in your work life, maybe in some decisions you have to make, maybe in a certain relationship or whatever, what have you. You tell me what parts of your life feel like it's being molded by God today. That's He Calls Me Loved, video 5. He calls you clay. You are flexible, moldable, and malleable. Next week, we will be on video 6 right here on the Heidi Gaiman Writes YouTube channel. You can always get the books He Calls Me Loved under the Studies Available tab at HeidiGaiman.com, and I'll see you next time.